All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Marshall W. Allworth Planetarium. My name is Rachel. I'm going to be giving your show tonight. Our show tonight is one that I actually created. We're going to be looking at some southern hemisphere constellations. This past May, I actually got the chance to go to New Zealand, and I thought it was really cool to see a bunch of stars that I had never seen before, even though I've worked with the stars for a bunch. During the show today, if you need to leave at any time, please feel welcome. Just exit out the same door that you came in. It does get kind of dark in here, so please do follow the tape along the bottom. And with that, I will head to the back and get the show started. All right, so we are going to be beginning right here in Duluth. You'll notice our date and our time are a little bit different than what they are right now. We have it set back to the beginning of March, and then it is also pretty early in the morning. And this is because I want to talk about some constellations that we can see here in Duluth, and also some new ones for the Southern Hemisphere. And in order to do that, the ones I wanted to talk about are up during this period of time. Another reason we are starting off in Duluth is so when we head on down and move to Auckland, you guys can see how the sky is going to change as we move further south. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So there is a pretty big time jump. It's about almost dark. The sun is set 7:30 p.m. the same day on Monday, March 4th. And there is about 18 or 19-hour time difference, so quite a bit. But in order to see the stars and kind of see how things are, we're going to go ahead and fast forward time until it gets dark, which is going to be at about 8:30. And there we go. All right, so starting off our show, like I said, we are going to talk about some things that are familiar to us up here in the Northern Hemisphere. And to kick us off, we're going to talk about something that is kind of getting low in the horizon in the northwest. Right here, that is going to be M45, also known as the Pleiades. So up here, we know it as the Pleiades. It's a star cluster. It has significance to a lot of cultures throughout the world. Including like the Japanese, they call it Subaru, if anybody's familiar with the Subaru car company. But we can see about 6 or 7 stars down here on Earth. Now, because we're in the planetarium, do a little planetarium magic, I'm going to make the Pleiades a little bit bigger so we can see what they look like. Yeah, so you can see kind of that shape that we see, almost like a mini dipper. Now, because we were talking about some constellations we can see in New Zealand, I also wanted to talk a little bit about what some constellations mean to the Maori, which are the indigenous people of New Zealand. So to the Maori, this is known as Matariki, and this rises in midwinter. Now, remember, their seasons are opposite ours, so their midwinter is going to be in about June or July. The rising of this group is the start of the Maori New Year, and this little group of stars also has relation to their god Tahiri Matea, who was the god of wind. Now, the story behind it goes, this god was very angry when his siblings separated their parents, which were the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. He became so angry that he tore out their eyes and threw them up into the heavens. So in that story, the stars that we see are his siblings' eyes. To the Maori, this is traditionally a time to acknowledge the dead and release their spirits to become stars. And it's actually a public holiday on a Friday in either June or July of each year. All right, we're going to make the Pleiades smaller again, just so we can talk about some other things. It's kind of just how many stars we can see. So you can see, depending on how dark it is, like 6 or 7. The story didn't really go into how many eyes there were, but my guess is possibly 3 siblings, because you can see about 6 stars. But yeah. All right, moving on now to another constellation that should hopefully be pretty familiar to us. It's up right now in our wintertime sky, and that is going to be Orion. So I'm turning on the lines for Orion right now. And he might look a little different than what you might recognize if you know the stars. We can have his head right here, his shoulders, either a club and a shield, or a bow and some arrows. We've got his body, his knees down here, his belt, and then we kind of imagine a sword kind of hanging off right there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the artwork for Orion. And you might be a little confused. You know, this doesn't look like the constellation that we know, even though we're on the same planet. And this is because the constellations that we know appear in the northern hemisphere. When we see them in the southern hemisphere, are flipped upside down. So if you can like rotate your head and turn it upside down, it should look pretty normal to you. But we get it to be upside down. Now, Orion does have significance to the Maori as well. They know Orion's belt as Tatori, or Tatoru, excuse me. And this has some significance to their star lore as well as celestial navigation. So these three stars right here are supposed to represent three brothers who descended from the sky to give wisdom and guidance to people. Them being so close up in the sky is a reminder of familial and ancestral importance. And these three stars were also, or these three brothers were also associated with the legend of Tahaki, who was a hero who climbed to the heavens to get sacred knowledge and also avenge his father's death, and he used the stars to guide him. Now, these three stars were also very essential when sailing in the Pacific Ocean because they kind of steer you east and west, and you can also use them to tell the time and figure out what point of the night you're at. So that is Orion. We are going to go ahead now and fast forward time to about 11:45, just so these next groups or these next constellations are nice and high and front and center for us. You can see the stars moving across the sky. They rise up in the east and they set down in the west. And there we go, right about 11:45. So the next constellation we're going to talk about is one that we are going to start seeing up a little bit more here in the northern hemisphere because it is a spring constellation for us, and that is Leo the Lion. So I'll turn on his lines so we can talk about him. So we've got his head right here, body, kind of his front legs, his belly, back legs, and his tail. He's kind of lounging. And to us up here in the northern hemisphere, we see Leo the Lion. Kind of what's identifiable about him is him being a backwards question mark. But if you flip that upside down, you just get an upside down question mark. Leo is part of the zodiac. We're going to talk about quite a few of the zodiac constellations tonight, just because they are kind of prominent up in the night sky. It's pretty easy to find them. But here's Leo. All right, the next constellation is not one of the zodiac, but it is Hydra. I'll go ahead and turn the line and the art on. So we've got the head up here, and then we've got the long body stretching out across. Hydra is actually the largest of our 88 modern constellations. It represents a water snake, and this actually spans the celestial equator. So that kind of tells us what can be seen in the northern and southern hemisphere. So the things we're going to talk about, you can look kind of up and behind you. Sorry, this is kind of right overhead. These groups of stars are only seen in the southern once we get further south. So we can't see any of those up here as far north as Duluth, but we'll talk about those in just a minute. So going back to Hydra, this was originally adapted from a Babylonian constellation, but to the Greeks, it was associated with the monster Hydra, who was kind of a monster that if you cut off one head, two more would grow in its place. This monster was killed by Hercules and is included in that tale, as well as Leo the Lion is also included in that as well. All right, going back to the zodiac, up next, I'm going to turn on Cancer the crab. So once again, part of the zodiac, we see Cancer. He's got his claws up here leg down here. He's almost kind of missing one. One interpretation of that is, again, this is part of the Hercules tale, Hercules myth. In this myth, Cancer was sent to Hercules to distract him as he battled Hydra. And unfortunately for the crab, Hercules stepped on him. So, you might infer that he maybe lost a leg during that battle. All right. One of the last familiar ones we're going to talk about is Virgo. Again, one of the zodiac. Virgo is the second largest constellation up in the sky. And we see her head up here. We've got her body with some legs or a dress reaching down. And then she's got an arm outstretched like that. And once again, part of the zodiac. Now, right at the very end of the show, we will swing back around and talk about some more constellations that may be familiar to you if you have any star knowledge, a couple more zodiacs. But for now, we are going to go ahead and swing around to the south and talk about our southern hemisphere constellations. Okay, so the first one that we're going to talk about is kind of high up in the sky. Me personally, once I learned where to look, it is the first one that jumps out at me and the first one that I can see. And this is going to be the constellation of Crux, or the Southern Cross. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on its lines and its art for you. It's located right up here. It has 5 stars. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it makes a cross. There are a lot of Southern Cross asterisms. An asterism is a recognizable shape of stars within a larger constellation, and these false crosses, which may be part of other constellations. For example, if you look right over here, it almost looks like there's a cross. But they are false crosses. This is the real one right here. This constellation is actually used similarly to how we use Polaris. So if you're familiar with the North Star or Polaris, that's the star that is pretty much right on our celestial pole, which means it points at our North Pole. So we're able to find our way north using that. We can do the same thing or something very similar with Crux here. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the southern celestial pole for you so you can see where that is. Popping up right here. And you can see, if we use the bottom part of the cross, it points us in the direction of where south is. So this was important for navigation and for getting around, kind of just orientating yourself. Crux also has kind of a cool background. Believe it or not, even though we can't see this constellation today, the Greeks were actually able to see this cross before it dipped below the horizon due to something we call precession of the axis. So as Earth rotates, it kind of wobbles like a top, and this goes in 26,000 year cycles. So our direction relative to the fixed point of stars kind of shifts. So for example, Polaris was not always our North Star, and it will not always be our North Star. So just like that, Crux used to be visible from the northern hemisphere. Now, like I said, the Greeks were able to see this, but also parts of Europe were as well. And they actually linked the disappearance of this cross with the crucifixion of Christ. So some European countries, by 400, this constellation was not visible in Europe, and so people kind of drew their conclusions like that. This constellation also has meaning to other cultures as well, besides the Greeks and the Europeans. To the Inca, this is known as Chacana, which is the stair. To the Maori, this is known as Te Punga, or the anchor, excuse me. And to the Australian Aboriginals, this is known as the head of the emu in the sky. Now, to them, they also look at something else that is right next to the star, or excuse me, the constellation. Right in this area, we have something called the Coalsack Nebula. So I'm going to make it bigger just so you're able to see it. And the Coalsack Nebula is a dark nebula. So this means it's a dense cloud of dust that blocks out any visible light from objects that are behind it. We can see it located at the bottom part of the cross. And when I make it smaller again, you should hopefully be able to see kind of a dark area right in this part which is where the Coalsack Nebula is. We'll talk about this fuzzy band later, kind of at the very end of the show, but you notice you can't see all of the light peeking out from behind it. All right, moving on, we'll come back to that, but moving on, our next constellation is going to be one called Centaurus. So Centaurus is going to be a centaur, which is a half horse, half man. So we have his head, some arms reaching out. You've got the human part of his body, the horse part with the front legs and the back legs. Now, again, this is one of the largest constellations that we see in the sky, and sources kind of differ on which centaur this is depicting. Usually, especially to the Greeks, this was depicted as Chiron, who was a mentor to Greek heroes, including Hercules, Achilles, Perseus, heroes like that. Chiron was the son of the Titan king Cronus and the sea nymph Philyra, and he was well known as a well-respected teacher of medicine, music, and hunting. This character, or this centaur, was immortal, but he unfortunately was struck by an arrow from Hercules dipped in Hydra's blood, and it was in immense pain, so Zeus released him of immortality so he would be able to pass peacefully. This constellation also has two of the top 10 brightest stars in our night sky right here, Alpha and Beta Centauri. And to the Babylonians, this was known as Bison Man. So depicted a four-legged bison with the head of a man, or like a creature with a human head and torso attached to a bison or a bull. And this constellation is usually depicted as sacrificing an animal. In this case, the animal is Lupus, which is our next constellation. So this is going to be the constellation of Lupus, or the wolf. It represents an animal being sacrificed by a centaur. And how our line art and how our art, like this blue art, shows Lupus is slightly different. So to me, how I see this constellation is we've got some ears up here, kind of his mouth, with some legs, maybe his tail back here. But you'll see as I turn on this artwork that it's depicting the wolf laying on its back right there. All right. So these are some of the constellations. We've got Crux right up here, the Southern Cross. We have Centaurus right over here. And then we also have Lupus right down here. Now we will come back and talk about a couple more constellations kind of in that part of the sky, but we're going to first transition to talking about one that's a little bit closer to our southern celestial pole, and this is going to be the constellation of Octans. So this constellation unfortunately does not have any stories related to it due to how recently it was discovered and how faint it is, or how recently it was kind of named. But its star that is closest to the southern celestial pole is known as Sigma Octantis, or officially named as Polaris Australis, or the southern pole, or the South Star. So this is Octans right here. Not a super interesting one, so we are kind of just going to breeze on past it and move on to our next one, which I think is kind of fun. This one is going to be Musca. Musca is known as the fly. So we do have a fly constellation. You can kind of imagine it, got the body, maybe some wings sprouting up right there. So Musca was discovered by Dutch navigators in expeditions to the East Indies in the late 16th century. Originally, when it was discovered, it was called Apis, or the bee, because it was originally unnamed. And this name stuck around for 2 centuries. Now, originally, it was named Musca australis, or the southern fly, and this was because we used to have a northern fly. We don't anymore. Unfortunately, it has been renamed and repurposed. What we used to call the northern fly, is now known as Aries. Aries is part of the zodiac, but it used to be a fly. Yeah.
So not only does Aries have one of the smallest constellations, we used to be a fly.
Yep.
I'm an Aries. I'm taking offense to this.
So yeah, we used to. That's probably part of the reason it's one of the smallest constellations, is because it's. Um, but yeah, so we've got the Southern Fly. All right, we are going to move just a bit further into the nighttime sky, just for these last few constellations to talk about, just so they're again up nice and bright in our sky. So Draco would not be, because Draco is actually something we call a circumpolar constellation, but up here in the northern hemisphere. Leo is able to be seen, from the northern and southern hemisphere. It kind of just depends on, time of night, or where you're at for when it's up.
But the snake you're seeing is Hydra.
Yes, yes, no worries. So going back just real briefly before we talk about these last few constellations, circumpolar constellations, they're constellations that rotate around like the celestial pole, and they appear to stay up in the sky, or they do stay up in the sky throughout the year, even when other constellations are shifting around. So some of them in the southern hemisphere is going to be octans, of course, very close to our southern celestial pole. Also includes Crux, Musca, Centaurus, and Lupus also is included in that as well. So these are the constellations that really never set, or if they do slightly dip below the horizon, they don't go fully under. All right, so the next constellation we're going to talk about is going to be Scorpius. So again, we're heading back to the zodiac. Scorpius is a scorpion. I'm going to turn on its lines real quick. We can see the head right up here, and then the tail dips around and kind of hooks. And I'll turn on the artwork really quick, but I'm going to turn it off again in just a second to talk about something else. But Scorpius, to the Greeks, is associated with Orion. So the story goes Orion was infatuated with Artemis, who was the Greek goddess of the hunt. He thought the best way to impress her would be to go to an island and kill all of the animals on that island. She wasn't happy with him. She sent Scorpius on him to, fight him. Eventually, Scorpius stung Orion at the same time Orion killed Scorpius. So she put them up both in the nighttime sky, but on opposite ends from each other. So they're never up, or very, very, briefly up at the same time. So we see Scorpius during the summertime, and 6 months later, we'll see Orion during the winter. So that is how the Greeks saw this constellation. I'm going to just take away the artwork for a little bit. To the Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand, they saw this as Maui's hook. So if anybody's seen Moana, you remember Maui. He is the demigod. He was a god to the Maori people. And Maui's hook is very important. It was made originally from the jawbone of his grandmother and flax fishing line. Its full name is Te Matau a Maui, or the Hook of Maui. And this constellation is gone from the sky during the summertime, or during December, and directly overhead during June, July, and August, or the winter months. It guided Polynesian people south. So again, another way to guide or sail the seas even without modern technology. They use this hook to point them south, or the direction closest to south. See, it kind of points that direction going on south. So pretty cool. I'll turn the artwork back on for it now, but that is known as Maui's hook. All right, the last constellation we're going to talk about is going to be Sagittarius. One final zodiac for us to talk about. Sagittarius is known to have the teapot asterism, because you can kind of see a teapot out of some of the stars. So we've got the body of the teapot, the handle, the lid, and the spout, kind of blowing the steam out that way. And believe it or not, this is another centaur. You have to use your imagination a little bit more for this one, to kind of imagine a centaur there. But Sagittarius is pretty cool for another reason besides it just being a centaur. It is located in the same region of sky that the center of our galaxy is located. So kind of right in this portion of sky, we have the center of our galaxy where the supermassive black hole lies. The name of our supermassive black hole is Sagittarius A star, named because it's pretty close to the constellation. And that also is kind of why, if you see this fuzzy band that I've been talking to, why it's pretty bright in this part of the sky. So this fuzzy band is actually our Milky Way galaxy. This is all of the stars that are too far away to be seen as individual pinpoints of light, and so we see it as kind of a fuzzy band. Now, real quick, going back, you might notice it's not just a straight band. We have a bunch of dark spots where we can't, fully see the light. And this is from various clouds of dust, gas, just things blocking the light from getting through to us. So that's what the Coalsack Nebula does. It blocks the light from getting to us, so it appears as a dark spot in the Milky Way, right up there. All right, so that is the end of the constellations I wanted to show you. We're going to fast forward time again, moving through just so you can watch the stars move and we'll see the sun come up. And take a peek at these stars or these constellations kind of right in this area and how they kind of rotate around our southern celestial pole. So you'll see the stars or more stars rising up in the east and they set down in the west. And because this is beginning of March, which is still their kind of getting into their fall, they do have longer days. So we've got a nice early sunrise right there. And that brings us to the end of our show. So thank you guys so much for coming. If you have any questions, I can do my best to answer them. Oh, thank you. We do have star charts out by the TV out there if anybody wants to try and find the northern hemisphere stars. Also, please make sure you check around the seats so you don't forget anything. Keys, phone, wallet, small children, those tend to get left behind. But thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful rest of your night.
And also make sure you grab a pair of eclipse glasses.
Yes. Huh? Stop recording? Yep, and the other bottom one too.